Hey, it's Brian Goulet of the Goulet Pen Company and InkNouveau.com. This is a Fountain Pen 101 video on nib sizes. Nibs, depending on how they're ground and the size of the tip that actually touches the paper, will give you a different line width and variation while you write. So I wanted to cover some of the basics of what causes nibs to write in different ways and maybe give you a little bit of guidance about which one might be right for you. Here we go. When it comes time to look at the actual designations, the abbreviations of nib sizes, usually you're going to find abbreviations, especially if you're shopping online. XF or EF usually designates an extra fine. If you go finer than extra fine, it's usually XXF or 2XF or something like that. That would be double extra fine or triple extra fine. Those are not very common. But fine is an F, medium is M, broad is B. I'm going sequentially here from finer nib sizes to wider. BB is double broad. OB would be oblique broad. If you had an oblique medium, it would be OM. O designates that oblique. If you have a stub nib or an italic nib, usually it's going to be designated by the millimeter width of the actual nib. So 1.1 is a very common size for stub nibs, so it would say 1.1 usually. Or it could say ST, that's another designation for stub. But if you have a 1.5 or a 1.9, you're getting wider for your stub. S designation means soft. It has a little bit of flexibility to it, so SF would be a soft fine, SM, soft medium, and so on. Here on GouletPens.com we have this neat little section called the Fountain of Knowledge, and if you click on that, it brings you to all kinds of good educational tools, but the thing I want to focus on here is the common online abbreviations. If you go here, we have listed all kinds of abbreviations which include nib sizes and designations that will help to alleviate any confusion that you might have if you're looking at any online forums and blogs. One tip that is at least a general guidance for when you're shopping for fountain pen nibs is that Japanese pens such as Platinum, Pilot, Sailor, they tend to be ground a little bit finer than the Western brands such as Lamy, Pelican, Parker, Waterman, Kaweco, etc. This isn't necessarily a steadfast rule, and it's going to vary from pen maker and pen model from one to another, but as a very, very broad generalization, the Japanese nibs tend to be ground about one nib size finer than their Western counterparts. Another handy tool we put together on GouletPens.com is something called the Nib Nook. You can get to it right from our menu bar, but it's an interactive tool where you can select from any of the pens that we have on GouletPens.com. I've personally write tested every single one of our pen and nib combinations. It took me a long time, especially to clean all the pens out. But using Noodler's Black on Rhodia 80 gram dot pad paper, you can see writing samples that I personally did, and it really helps when you're comparing nibs to each other, especially across brands, to get an idea of maybe a pen that you have already and how it might compare to something that you're interested in learning more about. I have this graphic here that I've drawn to show you the difference between a conventional fountain pen nib and what's known as a stub or a cursive italic and a crisp italic. Conventional nib is essentially has a round ball on the end of it, and that's going to give you a very uniform looking line. The ball, of course, can be different sizes and ground slightly different, but essentially you're getting this round ball that's going to give you uniform writing, much like I have with this very drawing that I did. Everything is pretty uniform no matter which direction I'm going. Now when you go to a stub, or what's known as a cursive italic, that ball is getting kind of flattened out. It's made wider, and what that does is that gives you some variation between the cross stroke and the downstroke. And what makes it a stub or cursive italic is the fact that the corners are rounded, and that makes it a little bit smoother while you're writing. Now if you have a true italic or a crisp italic, that's going to be ground to be very square, and this edges are going to be very sharp. And in fact, you can, if you have a true crisp italic, you can usually cut the paper because the edges are so sharp. That is going to give you the same line variation on the cross and downstroke that you'll have with the stub, except that the crispness and the sharpness of that variation is going to be much more dramatic with the crisp italic. However, you do have to write a lot slower with these. To demonstrate here the difference between a conventional pen and an italic or stub pen, I'll call it a stub because that's technically what I'm going to be using. Regular one has just got a ball and it's going to be the same up and down. There's really no variation in the line width, whatever direction I'm going. But with an italic or a stub, it's going to be different going down as it will be going across. You can see that line variation. And I personally am a big fan of the stub or italic nib because it gives you kind of a fancier writing without really having to do much different. It jazzes up your writing and makes it look a little more like calligraphy than a regular pen does. I also get asked a lot, what is the difference between a stub or an italic and an oblique? Some people hear about obliques. I have this graphic drawing to show you what that's all about. The stub or the italic, crisp or cursive, whatever it may be, is essentially just flattened on the end and it's uniform straight across. An oblique is the same concept as an italic, except that it's ground to be down one direction or the other. If you have a left oblique, that means you have an italic, but that the left side is a little bit shorter, I guess you could call that. It's a little bit closer to the grip section of the pen, so it gives you kind of a slant in the left direction. And a right oblique is the same thing, except in the other direction. The obliques are not incredibly common. In fact, they're pretty hard to find in modern pens. Some companies offer them by special order. I know Pelikan is one. I'm sure there are others as well, but it's really not very common anymore. Usually, if you want to get an oblique, you have to go to get a custom nib grind. Flex nibs are really kind of in a league of their own in terms of their size designations. But the main concept behind a flex nib is that you get a variation in your line width while you're writing depending on the amount of pressure that you put down. The reason that it does vary like that is because the nib tines are either ground to be thinner so that they're flexible, or like the Noodler's pen here, it's designed so the tines actually split apart while you're writing. And if you're using a light amount of pressure, you're not going to see a lot of line variation. It's going to write more like a conventional pen. But if you vary your pressure while you write, it's going to give you a line width variation because those nib tines are actually flexing apart. Usually with a size designation of a flex nib, if there is any at all, it's going to designate what the thinnest size is.
If you have any questions about fountain pen nibs or really anything pen related, feel free to email me at brian@gouletpens.com or post here in the comments. Thanks so much for watching, and write on.